This landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazell was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO classified. UFO classified. No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Well, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Erica Lukes. Always happy to be here and to look and chat and see the friendly faces, Northern UFOs. A big shout out to you, Libertas, Joe, Gabe, Doug Down Under, Bruce Cornett. Nice to see you. And definitely Scott Brown, who is one of my favorite people, very critical, and has a great Facebook page that you can visit, and I'll send links, or you can be invited to, where he actually really looks at photographs and identifies things that are mundane, and then talks about things that are perhaps anomalous, and I really give him a lot of credit for doing that. He's a very cool guy. I am here tonight with my friend and colleague, Nick Redfern, who is in Salt Lake, and we have spent the past couple days, he's actually been driving with me, which is, he's still a little shaken up, but we'll get through that. And we have been up to Park City, and we've been doing things, talking about different aspects of research. We're both researching things that intersect, and so it's been a lot of fun. And tomorrow he is speaking here at our Unexplained Utah meeting and at my archive, which will be very cool. As all of you who listen know, I have one of the best archives now that I've been working on for years in the Western United States, thanks to Barry Greenwood and Fran Ridge, Keith Chester, and Jan Aldrich. They have really helped me get all of these wonderful materials to show the public and teach them about the history of the matter, which is critical, especially right now when you've got all of these lovely things like the secret space program and things that are really stupid. I don't mean to say that, and don't quote me on that one, but what can I say? It's one of those nights. But I am here again, like I said, with Nick Redfern, who's got a brand new book out, and it just was released 2 days ago. It's called Area 51, The Revealing Truth of UFOs, Secret Aircraft Cover-Ups, and Conspiracies. I've been looking at the book since he arrived, and it really is a beautiful book. It is well done. I'm happy to have him here, and as most of you know, Nick is an accomplished author who's written over 50 books and has nickredfern40.blogspot.com, so you can check that out. He writes for Mysterious Universe and all sorts of things. So anyway, Nick, you've survived?
Just about. No, I'm kidding. It's all been good.
And you've never been to Utah?
No, it's actually my first time. But it's a cool place. I didn't really know what it looked like or anything like that. But yeah, it's cool to sort of, you walk out of Erica's apartment and you're surrounded by huge mountains covered in snow, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I'm having a good time and seeing a bit of the town, and found a few old UFO books at a local used bookstore, which was good.
Yeah, and actually we've got a really cool bookstore here called Ken Sanders, and he's world renowned for what he's done. And also, if you look back through Mormon history, and there was the Salamander letter, Mark Hoffman was involved in a lot of different things and was very shady, and I believe is still in prison. He forged the Salamander letter, and Ken Sanders was one of the people involved in identifying that as a forgery. So last time Greg Bishop was here, I took him to the bookstore, and we just spend hours going through things, and they have some really unique, rare books on UFOs, which it's awesome to me. And what did you buy?
I got an early Frank Strange's book, one of the early contactees. I got Orfeo Angelucci's first book from 1955, another early contactees, and a couple of other books from the 50s, which were sort of overviews on the whole UFO subject. But I like those old UFO books in that period because particularly the hardback editions, they got much cooler covers than the ones do today, really. They're sort of, painted artwork, and they kind of stand out from that era. So I like collecting those old kind of 1950s era UFO books.
And so what books of mine were you particularly jealous of? I just really need to have my ego stroked for a minute.
Oh, yeah. Erica's got first editions of The Silver Bridge by Gray Barker, which was actually the first book written on Mothman. People think the first book published on Mothman was John Keel's book, 1975, The Mothman Prophecies. But 5 years before that, Gray Barker, who was an author and a publisher, published his own book, The Silver Bridge, which is kind of a strange book. It's almost like a Gonzo-style book, like mixing fact and fiction, but to tell a real story, if that makes sense. And that book, The Silver Bridge, is one of the three. That's a really cool one in Erica's collection. And also, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, which was published in the mid-50s and which was the first book published on the Men in Black. And also Albert Bender's MIB book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men, which was really the first book that sort of got across the stranger, weirder aspects of the Men in Black mystery. And, Erica's got all three in first editions in her collection, so that's pretty cool.
Well, thank you. I just needed to have my ego stroked for a moment, so I appreciate that. No, but it's fun. It's been so much fun to have you and in the archive and Ryan Burns, who is actually, I think, coming tomorrow. He's up by Skinwalker Ranch now at his property, and gosh, we've got a lot of people coming in from all over to hear you speak, which is cool.
Yeah, that'll be good. I always enjoy doing lectures and conferences, and I think the location we've got it in your building where you work. I think that'll be good. It'll be sort of a nice enough audience where you can size audience where you can have a good debate and questions and answers, and it won't be like a huge conference where it gets a little bit. I guess you don't kind of get that atmosphere, when it's a smaller venue. And I enjoy doing sort of like libraries and small groups because you can get like a good debate going and everybody can join in rather than, if there's 300 or 400 people there, not everybody gets a chance to ask a question. So hopefully, we'll have like a good, fun time tomorrow, and it'll be a good way for everybody to take part and get involved as well.
Well, I think we have such a great group of people here in Utah that I came in contact with, 10 years ago probably, and they've been doing, we do a lot of different things kind of underground. Utah's been a difficult place for me as a researcher to obtain information, and there are not a lot of written archives, and unfortunately, as we all know, and people who listen to the show, the Elaine Douglas files are hidden now in the vaults of MUFON, so that's a real bummer. But we tried to have a cohesive group, and they're amazing people, and they're from all different walks of life. We have Bruce Champagne, who will be there tomorrow, who is a cryptozoologist, and he's a biologist, and he's written several research papers, and he's touring all over now, and I'm excited for you to meet him. He's a great guy. So really cool people. I know. That's exciting.
That is.
I know. That's what I'm talking about. So you've got another new book, yes. And I will say this book looks really interesting. I think the subject is timely with the release of Lazar, Jeremy Corbell's movie. So talk to us about Area 51.
Well, that was actually a coincidence, but things sometimes happen like that. You've got the documentary coming out now about Lazar by Jeremy Corbell, and also, the books come out at the same time as well. And sort of 1988, 1989, sort of 30 years ago, was that period when Lazar started to go public about his claims about what was going on at Area 51. But over the years, there have been a few books written on Area 51, and like when I write any book, you want to be able to give the reader something new and not just go over old ground. So whereas most of the previous books on Area 51 were sort of histories of what was going on at Area 51, but with the emphasis on sort of secret aircraft and military programs, that kind of thing. But what I wanted to do was do something a little bit different, which is like a very large book. It's more than 400 pages long, but the emphasis is on the UFO angle of Area 51, whereas a lot of the previous books tend to focus more on the more down-to-earth aspects of what goes on at Area 51. But I chose to sort of put the emphasis on the UFO claims and try and nail them to the ground once and for all to see what the actual truth is, or if we can at least get, at least to a degree, close to the truth of what might be going out there. And are there real UFOs? Are there aliens out there? Or are there just classified aircraft which are being flown under the cover of UFO activity? Or is it a bit of both? So, as I said, it's a big book, about 400 pages, and it's got more than 100 photographs, some never seen before, of shots from Area 51 and things like this, and maps and documents. So the publisher's done a really good job of getting permission to get all this artwork for the book. And, I think because if you're going to write and have somebody read a 400-page book, you want to make it visual as well. 400 pages is a hell of a lot of material to read. And so when people can actually sort of see the pictures of the places and the sites and the facilities and the people as well, then you get a better vision of how the story is developing.
So let's go back to the history of Area 51 and when it first went public. I mean, who was George Knapp the first person that...
Well, I mean, Area 51 as an installation, if you like, really didn't become public until we had the 1988, 1989 Bob Lazar stories about, he claimed to have worked for a brief period out at a sub aspect of Area 51 called S4. And he said he worked there for a few months and worked on trying to back engineer alien technology, and reportedly there were alien craft there. Now, although that situation, that affair, if you like, really did bring Area 51 into the heart of the media, and in no time at all, people all around the world had heard of Area 51, and it appeared in things like The X-Files, Dark Skies, and Independence Day, and things like this. But even though Lazar was the one who arguably, gave it major publicity, I mean, way before that, there was a lot of controversy because back in the early 80s, 83, 84, the Air Force put in sort of a petition to try and seize a lot of the land in the area, because the concern was that if people could get too close to the base, they might see whatever was being tested out there. So the idea was for the Air Force to make a claim or a statement that, in terms of national security, we really should have access to this land and no one else should have access to it. And there was like a large court case, where a lot of the people in the area, some of them obviously and understandably didn't take kindly to plans to essentially have them relocated, even though, they were going to be reimbursed to quite significant amounts in some cases, but the people had lived there for years and wanted to stay there. So that went back to the early 80s. But things like the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71 Blackbird, and the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber, all of them at various times were tested out at Area 51 because it was so isolated and surrounded by mountains, and particularly so when the area where it became illegal to cross over into it, when those areas grew and grew and grew, no one literally, and that's still the case today, can get within about 10, 15 miles of the installation. And there are warning signs and, just telling people don't come any closer. They have the legal right, if you like, to essentially, if it looks like it's going to come down to, a hostile situation, they can sort of use deadly force. That hasn't happened. For the most part, UFO researchers who've got a little bit too close have been detained by security personnel and background checks undertaken, and then they've been, sort of fairly hefty fine, $500-600 in some cases, and detained for a couple of days to teach them a lesson, that kind of thing. So you cannot really get there at all today. But if you can go back to the early 1940s, for example, when Pearl Harbor happened, which was, this terrible attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii in December 1941, no one in the United States really was expecting that. There were rumors that the Japanese could potentially do that, but it really took the United States by surprise, and so many thousands were killed. And so plans were put into place very quickly to try and ensure that nothing like that would ever happen again. So a lot of research was undertaken at new facilities all around the world, and some of that research undertook like chemical and biological warfare research, like what became known as, excuse me, you had places like, installations around the world, around the country that researched, various aspects of chemical warfare, biological warfare, bacteriological warfare, and one of them, Fort Detrick, which originally was called Camp Detrick, and that was one of the ones that did that kind of research. But then there was also a necessity and a need for sort of advanced technology and warfare, and different types of weapons of war that could be used to ensure that this wouldn't happen again. And in terms of the aircraft research, and a decision was taken to where somebody like the Japanese or the Germans would never really be able to initiate another Pearl Harbor. The reason why Pearl Harbor, from the Japanese perspective, worked was because the planes were able to cross from Japan, across the Pacific, and then essentially launch the attack. But by creating the first operations, if you like, out in Nevada, the plan was, well, there was no way the Japanese could get that so far into the land, into the mainland of the United States. So the idea was, well, why not develop all these new aircraft and new technologies out at a place in the desert where most people wouldn't know about it. And from there, you would have the perfect place. No one would know about it, and certainly the Japanese would never be able to get to the place. Now, some of the early places that existed in the area at the time included the Air Force Bombing and Gunnery Range, the Tonopah Army Airfield, and the Indian Springs Auxiliary Army Airfield. And all of these installations were constructed, broadly speaking, in the area of what we would call Area 51. Then in 1951, that's essentially when things really took off big time, when a 1 kiloton atomic device was exploded in the area. It was a testing of a new atomic bomb. And from there, you had what became known as the Nevada Test and Training Range, the NT and TR. And that was created at Groom Lake in Nevada. And then in the mid-50s, you had the testing of spy planes onwards, like the U-2 spy plane. And then through the 60s, you had the Blackbird, and the 70s and 80s, you had the stealth bomber and the stealth fighter. But Area 51, part of the Nevada Test and Training Range, that is basically a sort of a brief, concise history of how and why it all began with Pearl Harbor, and then how there was the need for this isolated installation or installations that would never be penetrated because they're so isolated, and the Japanese would not be able to get there, as I said. And then from there, creating other smaller facilities and installations in that area, expanding them to what became known as the Test and Training Range, and with the most famous or infamous one of those facilities being Area 51. That's basically how it began, and how it still continues to this day.
That's interesting. And so when you have mention of alien craft being there, who were the people that specifically linked some of the things going on at this facility to extraterrestrial craft? Well,
I mean, it's important to note that for the very most situation, the military, obviously, who were cleared to know what was going on there, they knew what was going on. But for the most part, as I mentioned earlier, most people had never heard of Area 51 at all till the late 1980s. You don't really see much written about it in the UFO journals and magazines and books of the 50s, 60s, 70s. There's nothing really at all. And so for that reason, when you sort of bring the UFO angle into the equation, what you find is almost, in a very weird way, a complete lack of information, not just on Area 51, but Area 51 in relation to UFOs and aliens. There's really nothing before the late 80s, and a lot of it came from the story of Bob Lazar. Now, had it just been Lazar who was talking about all this, people might say, well, that's a bit suspect. But what happened was that when he came public with his story, he did, sort of encourage other people to come forward and share their stories. And of course, the big question is, was Lazar's story real? Was he being deceived to spread a fake story to try and sort of freak out the Russians, that kind of thing? Or was it some sort of strange counterintelligence program designed to hide classified aircraft under sort of a UFO banner? Somebody saw the stealth fighter or the stealth bomber 10 years before it was known. They might have thought they'd seen a UFO. So in that sense, it might play to the government's advantage to have people say, oh yeah, there were UFOs, as a means to cover things up like that. But then on the other hand, you do have a lot of people who come forward who claim knowledge of UFOs and aliens at Area 51. So it's a very sort of strange and complicated story, which I've sort of done my best over 400 pages to try and determine, where the truth begins, where the counterintelligence and the disinformation continues. Yep. And where it all links together.
We've got to go to break, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that with regard to the disinformation angle. I'm Erica Lukes here with Nick Redfern. Scott, I will ask your question. We will be right back.
Stand by. This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes. Erica Lukes. The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified. UFO Classified with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Toxins are everywhere, from the air we breathe to the food we eat and the water we drink. In a world where 80,000 known toxins and heavy metals threaten our very existence, how are you going to protect yourself and your loved ones? Introducing Pure Body Extra Strength, the world's first colloidal zeolite that helps trap and remove toxins as well as heavy metals from your body that are messing with your memory, clarity, sleep, and focus. Don't just take our word for it or the testimonials from our thousands of happy customers. Check out the hundreds of articles and case studies on the National Institute of Health website proving using Zeolite's powerful ability to remove toxins. For a limited time, listeners to KCOR will receive 10% off their first order. To get started, go to trypurebody.com and enter promo code RADIO10. Again, that's trypurebody.com. Toxic junk is all around us, but now you can take back control of your health and protect yourself by detoxing with Pure Body Extra Strength. You'll be on your way to sleeping better, thinking more clearly, and feeling more energetic. Go to trypurebody.com right now and get started today.
Here's what happened on the last episode of Three Guys, No Ties.
Close. I don't know what's more dumbass, him losing his license or that this was on the front page of a major news outlet.
It's a huge story, and of course we're going to cover it here on Three Guys No Ties.
It's not, but it looks ridiculous, and so you want to look. You clicked on it, right? We got it, don't we? I saw the same thing. As soon as I saw it on your computer screen, I wanted to see what that story was. So it's even newspapers are doing clickbait.
Three Guys, No Ties. Wednesday nights, 7 to 9 Pacific, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
I adopted Bento in 2010 from a shelter. A lot of people know him as Keyboard Cat.
That's just one adoption story that started at a shelter. Visit theshelterpetproject.org to find a pet near you. Brought to you by Maddie's Fund, the Humane Society of the United States, and the Ad Council.
It's great! I think it's great. It's great.
The all-new KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Great. Make a note of it. It's great!
The Fenton Files, where it's all connected.
You see, whoever controls technology controls the world.
Come explore a universe full of possibilities. Every Monday night at 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern. The Fenton Files. Go where no other show has gone before.
You can deny all the things I've seen, all the things I've discovered, but not for much longer. Because too many others know what's happening out there.
Whether it be UFOs, aliens, conspiracies, or even consciousness, your host, Lorian Fenton, has a file for that. The Fenton File. Fenton File. Your journey to the truth is but a file away. Live, Monday nights, 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The Fenton Files.
Incredibly intense.
The truth is just waiting to be discovered.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back. I'm Erica Lukes. I was happy to be here and see all of my friends, and I wanted to say hi to Douglas, and I hope you are feeling fabulous, my friend. Happy New Year to all of you. I do this show every week because I feel it is really critical to get good information out to the public, and the more I really sit back and listen to some of the radio shows that we have going on with people that speak on the lecture circuit, and some of the things in the UFO community, I'm becoming increasingly alarmed because this has really turned into it's been a circus for a long time, as we know, but it's also, in my opinion, very political and very dangerous, and it has nothing to do with the study of the phenomenon, and I think that's important. I think we need to get away from that and steer clear from certain Facebook groups where you are your comments are being monitored. I mean, this is real. This is happening. I hope that you all have used a level of discernment. I think you do because you're listening to my show, and I appreciate that. Anyway, I'm here with Nick Redfern, tonight who has a brand new book out, which is beautiful, called Area 51, The Revealing Truth of UFOs, Secret Aircraft Cover-Ups, and Conspiracies. And we are talking about, before we went to break, talking about some of the origins as far as Bob Lazar coming forward, people he was running with to get this information or to spin a narrative that is disinformation. That's the million-dollar question out there. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but Scott Brown has a question, and I want to ask this of Nick, and this is about the new information or articles coming forward about Rendlesham being a UFO revenge prank. Have you heard about that?
Yeah. The story is sort of a very strange one. For people who don't know, at the height of the Cold War, well, actually not just at the height of it, but going back 50s, 60s, 70s and onward, in the UK, there were a number of UK military bases which were leased to US forces. And like, for example, Royal Air Force Lakenheath and Upper Heyford and things like this, you had various bases which had large US presences, even though they were situated in the UK. And so you have where Rendlesham Forest, the incident occurred in December 1980, you had two bases very close to each other, Royal Air Force Bentwaters and Royal Air Force Woodbridge. One of them was comprised of British military personnel, and the other one was comprised of US personnel. That's how the situation existed. Now, this new revelation that came forward, it essentially talked about how the US personnel and UK personnel routinely would undertake missions, sort of like stage missions. They weren't sort of, attacking each other, but it was essentially testing each other's security. So, you might have the UK personnel test the security at the US base, and nobody else apart from the higher-ups would know that this was going to happen, because you needed to know if the bases could be defended. And so in this situation, you have this claim from this unidentified source who said that there was a confrontation between US personnel and a branch of the UK military called the Special Air Service, or the SAS. They're kind of like, what do they call the Navy guys? Anyway, sort of like the elite of the military, that kind of thing. And
I'm trying to think of the word that you're going for, but we'll figure that out. Okay,
but the SAS are sort of like the elite of the UK military, and the claim is that there was this confrontation between the US and UK forces, and the UK did not like it, and so they decided to create this sort of fake UFO invasion to get their own back, which is, to me, just sounds bizarre. Now, we do know for sure that in August 1980, 4 months before the UFO event, we do know for sure that there actually was one of these, testings of the base by UK personnel, vice versa. That did happen. But the claim that 4 months later, that British personnel decided to get their own back on US personnel by fabricating what would seem to be like a UFO event. I mean, they're not going to do something like that at a high security base and risk, at the height of the Cold War, sparking off a major alert. That's not how the military works. It's kind of like the equivalent of wherever your local, military base is to everybody listening right now, the idea of, foreign personnel saying, oh, we're going to play a joke on the staff there and fabricate a UFO event, the ramifications of that could be huge, and it just would not happen. So I think the story, is a bit of entertainment for Christmas, and that's about it. I mean, there've been so many theories put out for what happened at Rendlesham, but this is sort of without doubt the most bizarre and weird, and for me, the most unlikely one as well.
Interesting. Rendlesham's an interesting case, and I think unfortunately over the years there have been a lot of ego and people involved with different motivations and people who are involved in the case who are making money on the speaking circuit. And so there's a lot of things that take away from the real merit or the substance of the case, and that's unfortunate. But
I just remembered when I said, like the SAS are like an elite equivalent in the US. I meant the Navy SEALs. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, the SAS are sort of like the the equivalent of them. They're the highly trained, skilled units that go out to do the most sensitive work. And the idea that they would risk, causing a major confrontation between the US and the UK, at a strategic base that was keeping look for the Russians and whatever. It just wouldn't happen,
And thanks to ET UFO Disclosure and Northern UFOs and everyone in there for giving us your input on our little mind meld there. So I want to get back to the people that were originally involved in promoting the UFO story. And, we've got Bob Lazar and then we've got John Lear.
Well, there's one story that goes back to the early 1950s, an alleged UFO crash in Kingman, Arizona. And this goes back to May 1953. And the story first surfaced in the early 1970s to two UFO researchers. And it then reached Ray Fowler, who's a well-respected UFO investigator. And the story came from a man that at the time did not want to speak on record. And so Ray gave him the pseudonym or the alias of Fritz Werner. But his real name was Arthur Stansel. And Arthur Stansel actually worked on a number of intriguing installations linked to UFOs, like Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And at a time, in 1953, he was also attached to the Nevada Test and Training Range, which comprises Area 51. And so what happened was that according to Fritz Werner / Arthur Stansel, in May 1953, a UFO crashed outside of the Test and Training Range, but because basically what was happening, they were testing an atomic bomb there, and it was part of a program called Upshot Knothole. And so the plan was, and what did go ahead, was the detonation of an atomic bomb on the training range. And the story is that possibly this UFO was in the area and was blasted out of the sky by the sheer power of the atomic bomb, and malfunctioned and came down in the desert just outside of Kingman. And according to Stansel, he was taken out there to look at the site and saw a strange small body and this craft embedded in the sand. And it's a controversial story, and over the years, some people buy into the story. Other people point out correctly that in one of those atomic bomb tests, that a remotely piloted aircraft with rhesus monkeys on board was flown through the mushroom cloud to see how effective or not new shielding would be to radiation.
Of course.
So, on the one hand, you have those who say it was a UFO event with a small alien body. Then you have other people who say, no, it was like a remotely piloted aircraft that came down with rhesus monkeys. So the big question is, this was 53, so we're talking a long time ago now. You're talking almost 70 years. So, but the important thing is, and the intriguing thing is, that Arthur Stansel was not like a controversial whistleblower who was not able to prove his credentials. I mean, you can actually see his gravestone online, and find a grave, those kind of websites, and he fought for his country in the Second World War in Europe, and he did work. He held a high position at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, And he really did work at the test and training range. So he was no fool. He wasn't an idiot or anything like that. But that story did not surface publicly until the early 1970s. So although Stansel said it happened in 53, it wasn't in 53 when people were talking about that in relation to Area 51 and the training range. But Ray did a really good investigation of this, ironically, because in the 70s he didn't realise it until he found out that Ray Fowler and Stansel were actually working at that time in the same company.
Wow.
Yeah, which is like one of those strange, coincidences that sometimes happen, or synchronicities. So that allowed him to dig into it more and more. And, it is an interesting story. And it's a controversial one, but it does tie things in, as I said, with the training range, which is this huge range of which Area 51 is a small part. But for the most part, there have been a few snippets about weird stuff going on in Area 51 that you can find in various books over the years, but not much at all, and certainly not much in relation to UFOs. But if you jump forward to 1988, that's when things really kind of took off, with Bob Lazar and his claims of having worked out at Area 51. And then, you had George Knapp, who obviously is a local journalist in Las Vegas, realized that this was a big story, regardless of what the truth was. So he did a number of interviews with Lazar, it was broadcast and so on. And in no time at all, he was on some of the 1980s talk shows and things like that. And it really took off from there, where Area 51 and Lazar from 88, probably late 88, definitely through all of 89, early 90, Lazar was like the go-to guy in ufology for, some of the more controversial aspects of ufology and crashed UFOs and dead aliens, all that kind of stuff. And but also the byproduct, if you like, of this was that we didn't just get Lazar's claims. What we also got was the revelation of this base, Area 51, which most people didn't know anything about. And those even who lived in the area, who obviously knew about it, they had no reason to sort of tell anybody. It was just that secret base down the road, that kind of thing. Or over the hills, I should say, the mountains. But certainly, regardless of what people think or don't think of Lazar's story, he really was the guy who put it on the map for everybody.
Right, and it is interesting to note that he was, George Knapp put it on the map. Then you've got John Lear, who was involved in this, and there are several key figures that, again, are emerging in the telling of this story.
Well, yeah, the basic story is that according to Lazar, from late 1988 to early 1989, he worked at a small sort of like a sub area of Area 51 called S4, which also was part of the Nevada test and training range. And according to Lazar, he worked on, very briefly, people think he worked there for years. He didn't. According to him, because of various things that happened, that he left the program. And really, he hadn't spent perhaps more than 2 months max at the base, and that was it. And he claimed that out at S4, there were a handful of UFOs. He said most of them were actually in very good condition. Most of them didn't look at all as if they'd crashed. They looked in pretty much pristine condition. One of them had sort of a violent-looking dent in it or something like that. And he said it was his job to try and back-engineer the technology. Now, that, in essence, is the story. Now, you have people on one side of the camp who say they believe Lazar, some are open-minded. And then, like, for example, Stan Friedman, Stan's a full-on believer in Roswell, aliens crashing at Roswell. But Stan's exact words, I'm quoting him exactly right now in terms of Lazar's story. He said, and I quote, "Bunk, bunk, bunk, close quotes. That's what Stan said. He just did not buy into it. Now, the fact is that Lazar does have a controversial background, and in some cases it has proved to be difficult to confirm, his background, colleges, universities, that sort of thing.
You can't.
Yeah, that's right. Paperwork
there's
is
nothing.
gone. Now, for me, that's one of the more controversial aspects that, today where everything is done online, and you can wipe something out in a second, that makes it more difficult for us to get it. But back in the 70s, early 80s, you could make a case that it'd be really difficult to wipe out archives and documents from universities and just walk in and say we're taking
right, and
not have anybody remember when these guys came in and took all the documents and the files. So that is controversial, but there actually is some interesting stuff that I talk about in the book that a lot of people don't know when it comes to how Lazar got this job. Now, according to Lazar, what we do know, for example, this is important, he actually did for a while work at Los Alamos on classified programs. That is a fact, and his name is in the phone book, the Los Alamos phone book. And back in '82, he and a friend, they were working on jet cars. They were, converting regular cars into these cool things that could travel at like literally 200 miles an hour across the flats.
Right.
That's how clever he really was. He was a brilliant guy and still is. Now, he said that on one occasion, he saw an ad for that a lecture was going to be taking place by Dr. Edward Teller, one of the sort of most brilliant scientists who ever lived. And it coincided that on the very same day of the lecture, or the day before, I think it was, the local newspaper where Lazar lived had run a front page article on Lazar. Now, bear in mind, this is in '82. This was 6 years. It was front page news in '82 about his jet cars. A lot of people forget that or don't know about that. He didn't just surface out of nowhere in '88. It was front page news in '82. Now, what happened was that Lazar went to the lecture, and as he was approaching in the door, he saw Edward Teller sitting outside reading the newspaper and reading the article about Lazar. And so Lazar went over to him and said, "Hey, Mr. Teller, that's me." And so he said they had like an interesting 10-minute chat all about, Lazar's work with jet cars, and Teller thought that was a, really cool kind of thing. And then a few years later, when Lazar was sort of looking for more work and so on, he was sort of approached and basically said, well, there's a program that you might find interesting, advanced technologies, and it'd be something a little bit alternative. And, so the story is they did background on him. And the other story, or the rumor, is that Teller remembered him and said, "Oh yeah, you want to get this guy on board, So.
Well, that was, I think, from my recollection, that the Teller exchange was not anything. I don't know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you've done more research on this. It was a fleeting exchange. I didn't think it was that signisignificant. And I have to say, when you look at Lazar, to play the devil's advocate, you've got a person that has been, he's had legal charges that he's faced. He's worked in the sex industry. He's got a questionable background.
Well, I guess it depends how you define questionable, because, having an alternative background doesn't necessarily mean that he isn't credible. Sometimes intelligence agencies will recruit people who have a controversial background because if they need to, they can knock them down by the fact that they do have a controversial background. Having someone who's got a pristine, completely 100% shiny background and reputation, people are going to say, wow, that guy would never lie or do anything like that. Having someone who's got a controversial background can actually work in the favor of people who might want to use the person, but
for
also
disinformation purposes.
Well, also for disinformation purposes. But you are right, when Teller and Lazar had this little chat, it really was just, 5 or 10 minute chat about Lazar's work. But according to the story, in the late 80s, and if the story's true, of course, they weren't really making much headway or advances in terms of understanding the alien technology. That was the story. And so they were looking for people who could think outside of the box, who may be a little bit alternative in their approach, and bring people in like that. And so the story is that they were thinking of Lazar, and that Teller said that he remembered him, and he suggested, the theory is that, or the rumor was that it was Teller's influence that might have allowed for him, to get the final nod that, yes, you're going to come on board. Now, what happened was that, if you think about this, that, Edward Teller was a highly respected, brilliant scientist, worked in numerous think tanks and, with agencies in the government, the military, and so on. Now, when the story of Lazar broke, and the Teller story broke, when Lazar told the story about meeting Teller and so on, you would imagine somebody with Teller's background and so on would probably or possibly, they would take legal action. But Teller did not. What Teller did, he said, when the press approached him, when the media approached him, if you watch or you listen to the words, I'm not sure if it's actually available anymore on visual, but if you listen to it, he basically says, well, I don't remember him, and I don't remember referring him to, another agency, but I may have known him, and I may have referred to him, but I don't remember properly if I did. And it almost sounds like, the kind of thing that a lawyer would recommend is, the guy who he's working for to how to sort of, to spell the words out.
Well, if you're diffusing the situation and you're admitting, I might, you're not giving it any credence. Then that story will go away, though. Why would you? Well,
why would, if it was complete nonsense, why wouldn't Teller say, this is complete garbage, and I intend taking legal action against this guy for saying I worked on UFO programs and so on. Because
the devil's advocate here again, you can, feel free to just push me off my chair at any point in time. But there are lots of ways to discredit somebody without taking legal action, or there are lots of ways to diffuse situations.
There is, but to me, it sounds very much like the things we hear today. When politicians say, I don't recall, that's the, 3 words we hear so much in today's political world.
Oh, and there's the music. So we've got to take a break. Well, this is very exciting. I'm here with Nick Redfern, and I know that we've got lots of questions in chat. Thanks for being such a great audience. I will get to those questions. Stick around, because trust me on this one, the best is yet to come.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazil was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth? You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the second half of UFO Classified. I want to give a shout out to everybody in chat. Again, I appreciate all of your help. Northern UFOs, it means the world to me that you get all of my shows on YouTube. And if each of you could, when I'm posting the link for the show, for the evening show, if you could share that information, that would be wonderful. I'm a one-woman show here, and so it makes it very difficult when you have a business. You are trying to spend 30 plus hours a week researching and all of these things to get information out. And I suppose I need to have my own little team of fans, but I don't like to look at you as fans. You're my peers, and I appreciate what you do. So anyway, on that note, I am here with my friend and colleague, Nick Redfern. He has been in Salt Lake for a couple days. Tomorrow he'll be lecturing about Men in Black, which will be really cool. I have a great group of people in Utah, and actually people coming from all over the state, and potentially Ryan Burns will be visiting us from Las Vegas, which will be neat. Ryan Burns has been on my show before and has done a lot of work with regard to Skinwalker. He has a property that is right by Skinwalker Ranch. He goes back and forth, so I look forward to seeing him. Nick Redfern has just written a new book, which is amazing. I have looked at it for the past couple of days. It's called Area 51, The Revealing Truth of UFOs, Secret Aircraft Cover-Ups, and Conspiracies. And I would definitely recommend that. Nick is one of the most diligent researchers that I know, and I can talk to him for hours on end, and he's always coming up with more and more information, and I don't know how he retains the knowledge. It's really an amazing thing, and I appreciate him teaching me a lot about things, and so it is great. But when we left off, we were talking a little bit about Teller and Lazar, and Lazar's claims that he was working with Teller and some of these things, and
Well, it wasn't so much he was working with Teller. The theory was that having met Teller and Teller was kind of impressed by these sort of rocket cars that he was building. The theory or the scenario is that maybe Teller was the guy who kind of said, "Why don't you speak to this guy?" Now, what I would say is that although there are a lot of people who think, like Stan Friedman, who think that the Lazar story is just totally bogus. But as well as being on the front page of the local newspaper 6 years before he went public with the UFO stuff, he did actually work, and this is a fact, it's not rumor or just, a potential correct scenario. It actually is correct that he worked back in the 1982, what was called the Los Alamos Meson Physics Facility. And today it's called the Los Alamos Neutron Science Center. And that particular program did a lot of atomic nuclear-based research, and which was covered by national security issues. Now, whether or not people buy into the UFO story, that is a fact. And he was in the Los Alamos phone book, and he was part of the Lance program. There's no doubt about that. That's fact. That's evidence. So, but you have somebody who, has a background that's controversial. Now, you could take me, for example. I'm writing books, and people could say, well, Nick's not credible because for 6 years, which is true, for 6 years, I was a feature writer for Penthouse, a sex magazine. And Lazar, had this connection as well. It doesn't mean that my background isn't credible. It just means for 6 years I wrote features for Penthouse. I did that for years, writing articles. But that doesn't mean that because you write for a sex magazine that somehow your UFO research is invalid. The people who kind of make that leap, it really is a leap, And I think if I was running this program out at Area 51, I think I would hire people who are brilliant, but who are controversial and who can be knocked down in the event we need to.
Well, but I would say that I think a majority of the people that work, for private contractors or in the military, I mean, they're under the radar. You don't typically put somebody out there that can be used as leverage unless you're using them as disinformation.
Well, yeah, I mean, what disinformation is one of the big things I talk about in the book. I have an entire chapter in the book where I, present my thoughts on, was Lazar faking it himself, or was he being actually used as like a patsy to believe? The one theory is that they brought him into the program, did a profile background on him, realized that if they exposed him to this story, he would probably go public with it, and then the Russians would sit up and take notice, and maybe in the process, we could reel in some Russian spies, that kind of thing, almost like, sort of a spider in the web, that kind of thing, the fly in the web of the spider.
Right.
So there's different ways of looking at it, but what I would say is that if you go back to the not late 40s, but certainly early 50s onwards, there were, unfortunately, a lot of hoaxes in ufology. There always have been, and there always will be. That's just one of the unfortunate aspects of the subject. A lot of those hoaxers and people who fabricated stuff, they've been on the lecture circuit for years, in some cases decades, talking about their dubious claims and fabricated photographs and things like this. And when their story dries up, lo and behold, there's a new part of the story that they can go and talk about on the lecture circuit again. Well, if you look at Lazar's history, he's never written a book about his experiences. The number of lectures and conferences he did was minuscule compared to the average person who speaks at a conference. So he didn't really do much on the lecture circuit. He never wrote a book. Yes, there's this documentary out now, but there's never been a Hollywood movie about him. In other words, Lazar, to me at least, doesn't come across the way that most hoaxers in ufology have come across. They've constantly wanted public attention, constantly wanted to be on the lecture circuit, writing book after book of their experiences, and then they write a book because new stuff's come out, allegedly, so they write another book. Lazar doesn't fit that kind of typical approach. He was very much in the background after 80. If you think about it, everything he basically talked about for the most part was 88 to 90. And you can argue that to a significant degree, he went into, I won't say oblivion, but you know what I mean. He was very much off the radar after that period. It was mainly other people talking about him, not Lazar himself. So, you have to
wonder. Other people that were making a profit off of his name.
But he wasn't.
Keeping the story alive.
He wasn't.
Well, that we know of.
Well, I've never seen any evidence, for example, in 1991, Timothy Good's book, Alien Liaison, came out in the UK, and Tim extensively interviewed Lazar, and the subject of that interview covers a couple of chapters in Tim's book. But that was Tim talking about Lazar's claims. If you look at it, you don't find a book, of where Lazar wrote his own book, his own story. And so you have to wonder, even if the story's faked, what on earth is the advantage in Lazar telling the story and then not doing anything with it other than sharing with a couple of radio hosts or whatever?
Well, you look at, some of the things that maybe like Bill Moore or some of these people have done. It's like they, a lot of people thought that Bill Moore he'd be making a lot of money doing A, B, C, and D, but yet he is now hidden away and yeah, I don't know if everything can fit like a standard. Like this is
no, things aren't black and white. I agree with you on that. But I know, for example, that some of the bigger groups and organisations and magazines that still existed in the printed era, they would love to have somebody like that on their conferences. I mean, if you go back to the 1990s, when I started lecturing, at conferences in the mid 90s, you did not see Lazar speaking at those huge events. So again, I mean, I can only sort of look at it from the perspective of how he doesn't come across like the average hoaxer. Now, that doesn't prove anything, but it does demonstrate that this man told an extremely long and winding and deeply extensive story and chose to do nothing with it beyond speak to a few radio hosts and a couple of authors like Tim Good,
But I mean, I think the interesting thing, and again, I'm, devil's advocate, but I mean, there were people like Knapp and John Lear and people that were involved in promoting this story. And although Lazar wasn't on the speaking circuit, these people most certainly were out there promoting that same.
Well,
narrative.
They were, but the thing that I go back to is that I don't understand why Lazar would do it if there was no gain for him. So, but I mean, some of the things he talked about, were interesting. I mean, you look at the Philip Corso story, which I think is complete garbage about back engineering the Roswell wreckage. I think it's nonsense. But, his Corso story, there was this program and they were back engineering, fiber optics and night vision and, computer technology. But Lazar said, you might say that if Lazar faked this, he'd want to really say, we're developing all these weapons and whatever. But what Lazar actually said, he said that hardly any advances had been made because the technology was so difficult to understand. So in other words, there was even the excitement factor was removed. He didn't say, we're developing all sorts of cool weapons from the aliens. He didn't. He said by the time he got on the program, they were having big troubles trying to understand the technology. It was the exact opposite of what others were saying, And so in that sense, his story was kind of played down. He was like, no, they haven't really done much with it at all. They just sit there, scratch their heads and look at the technology, but they haven't done much with it. And again, that doesn't sound like, I would think a hoaxer would really want to sensationalize that angle. We're developing laser weapons from the aliens and we're developing this from the aliens. But Lazar was like, nah, they've done nothing, aren't
But
they?
yet he is the one who has talked about soul containers and kind of these other stories and the element, smuggling a little piece of.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the most controversial, if not the most controversial aspect of his story is one that a lot of people don't know. And he said that when he got this job out at S4, he said not only was he shown these craft, he claimed that he was also shown fairly extensive files on UFOs and classified programs that the government had done in relation to UFOs, and also the alleged history of the UFO phenomenon and its interactions with us. And he said that one of the things was that in the files that we were referred to by the aliens, or whatever you want to call them. In essence, we were perceived by them as containers. And when various researchers have said to, what do you think that means? He's always said doesn't really know for sure, but he came up with a scenario of what maybe containers of souls. The idea that these extraterrestrials or interdimensional creatures, whatever they are, that they were less interested in us as physical beings, but more interested in the nature of the human soul. Now, if you look at books today and research today, the issue of souls in relation to abductions and all this kind of stuff started off pretty much with the work of people like Whitley Strieber, who talks about this sort of soul stealing kind of angle in Communion. John Mack had a lot of stories as well of people who claimed that have out of body experiences if their soul had been sort of ripped out in the abduction. So it is, again, it's interesting. It doesn't prove anything, but that Lazar was talking about this soul angle 31 years ago, back in 1988, when most people in ufology were not talking about souls and, and abductions. So again, it doesn't prove anything, but it shows he was a guy who had some interesting stuff that other people would kind of dig into, years later, sometimes decades later. So.
Well, that is interesting, and I think there's such a divide when it comes to Lazar, and I know that the new movie, the Corbell did. There are a lot of people who are absolutely supporting Lazar and his claims, and I would love to get to have both Jeremy and Lazar on the show.
Might be good. Yeah.
So I can ask them some of these things. And then there are people who I feel are very credible who question his integrity and question the fact that. Here you've got a guy like Stan Friedman says you can't even, he graduated from his high school class at the bottom of the class. And now all of a sudden he's, one of these top people who is being shown the keys, the keys to the kingdom.
But it is a fact, though, that he did work his way up to Los Alamos. That he did. That's not, as I said, that's not rumor or hearsay. He worked on a classified national security program in Los Alamos years before he popped up in relation to UFOs.
And I know you're going to push me off my chair. Again, you're like, oh.
No, but it's actually good, that we can have a good debate and come from different angles, because that's actually what we need. We need people who say, well, I understand what you're saying, Nick, but I think you're wrong. And somebody else says, well, I think you're right. That's what we need. Now, one of the other aspects that's, again, that doesn't, for me, sit well with the typical hoaxer is that, and I talk about this extensively in the book, is that according to Lazar, when he was out at S4 one particular day or evening, he was specifically told to go with two guys down one particular corridor where there was a door and a pane of glass large enough to where he could see into this room that he was walking past. And he says as he walked past, there were these two guys in sort of outfits looking down at this small figure and talking to it. And he sort of barely saw it for a second. Now, a typical hoaxer would really embroider that, I think. But Lazar said, I don't think it was a real alien. He said they played a lot of mind games with me. And he said, I think it was probably like a dummy. And they put it there to test my reaction. Now, that doesn't sound like a hoaxer who would really want to amplify things by saying, oh, yeah, I saw an alien at Air 51. They've got aliens there. He said, no. He said, I think it was a dummy meant to screw with my mind. So.
Well, every once in a while, you got to lead the troops in different places to confuse the conversation.
And again,
but I mean, if you, honestly, the people that I have spoken with that have been in intelligence or have worked on these top secret programs, I mean, you sign your life away. You have a commitment to your country, and you don't go back on your word. Mm-hmm. And so for Lazar to have given as much supposedly, classified information out to the public is, in my opinion, I guess that would say that's questionable as far as his service for the military. And, I don't know. I mean, I think there's some interesting questions.
Well, yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff about Lazar's story. There's no doubt about that. And that's one of the problems. One of the issues as to why the story still has legs, so to speak, because it isn't your typical, even if it is a hoax, it's not your typical hoax. That's an important thing to note. But I mean, one of the other controversial aspects to all of this was that, he said that one of the reasons they had problems back engineering these alien craft was because they were powered by this super heavy element called element 115, which reportedly does not exist here, and so on. Now, again, another story that I talk about extensively in the book is a lesser-known story concerning computer hacking. Now, a lot of people will know the story of Gary McKinnon, this guy who hacked NASA and various US military installations in search of UFO data in the early 2000s. A lot of people don't know that back in the mid-1990s, there was another guy in the UK, a Welshman, named Matthew Bevan. And Matthew Bevan did exactly the same thing. He hacked NASA, Wright-Patterson, a bunch of other places, and not surprisingly, US authorities wanted to hammer him into the ground, and they extradited him to the US. It was basically the McKinnon story, but a decade earlier or thereabouts, 6-7 years earlier. And he was actually arrested. Matthew Bevan in 96 was arrested by Scotland Yard and by their computer crimes unit, the CCU as it was known then. And Bevan admitted to what he'd done. And the Scotland Yard said, well, what did you do? And he said, well, I went looking for information on UFOs. I hacked into Wright-Patterson. He admitted all this. And he said, and I found data on this. What he actually found, he said, was a bunch of emails between staff at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and other facilities talking about this split-level aircraft they'd been flying, which had this super heavy element to power it, which sounds very much like Lazar's story. But this is part of the Scotland Yard investigation. That became part of the official record. Now, the case was dropped eventually, and Bevan walked free. But he was, part of his story, which Scotland Yard, said to him, did you download and print anything on this super heavy element? And so on. He said, no, I just read it all online. They're like, are you sure? Yes. Are you really sure? Yes. It was like that. And so Matthew Bevan's story of coming across these files on this split-level circular craft powered by a super heavy element, that was in the files of Scotland Yard. That's how far this story has kind of gone. Now, again, it doesn't prove anything, but Bevan's story is an interesting one when it comes to this idea of super heavy elements and weird split-level aircraft and, just really strange stuff.
Well, it's never a dull moment.
No.
And I know we've got a caller on the line, which we will get to after our last little break. I want to again thank everybody for getting in there, asking great questions. I know there's a question in chat that I want to get to as well. I'm Erica Lukes here with Nick Redfern. We will be right back for our last break of the evening. Stick around.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
With Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
1 million miles till midnight. A story of timelines, artificial worlds, simulated races, and the galactic imprint, and the destiny of a blue world called Earth. 1 million miles till midnight, written by Solaris Blue Raven, is a journey through the mind's eye which allows the reader to surf a wave of technological and multidimensional intellect, revealing a bridge between conscious design and the truth. A multidimensional bleed-through awakens the world of artificial intelligence to set sail into the frontiers of a vast multiverse, morphing planets and terraforming ascended worlds beyond the linear programs of a fated race. 1 million miles till midnight will awaken, inspire, prepare, and enlighten one to the many multidimensional states of consciousness and worlds we reside in. With every cell and atom, we are this truth and multiverse. 1 million miles till midnight. Written by Solaris Blue Raven. Available now at Amazon.com. Don't wait. Get your copy today.
The all-new KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Great. Please make a note of it. It's great.
There is a world outside that which we live in, a realm where fact and fiction collide. The Paradigm Matrix. The Paradigm Matrix. Hosted by Willie Miranda. Every Friday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room.
The 1 hour show that will surely leave you hanging on the edge of the rabbit hole. The Paradigm Matrix explores a universe of topics from UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracies, as well as all things paranormal.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
Friday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Paradigm Matrix. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, where fact and fiction collide.
Alien Deceptions, a suspenseful sci-fi romance thriller by Tina Marie. Featuring the tantalizing Erica Jones and the mysterious Russell Hamilton. An out-of-this-world book of fiction based on years of document facts and files the government does not want you to know about. At least, not yet. Alien Deceptions by Tina Marie. Available now at Amazon.com or get a signed copy at TinaMarieEntertainment.com. Get your copy now.
You're listening to UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the last segment of my show. It's been a great show as always. I'm here with Nick Redfern in my studio, which has been great. Nick's been here visiting me, and I've been taking him around to different sites in Utah. We've been talking about research that we're both working on behind the scenes. It is incredible. He has a new book out, which is Area 51 and the revealing truth of UFOs, secret aircraft cover-ups, and conspiracies, which you can find on Amazon. And Nick has written Barnes & Noble, as well. He's whispering in the back, in case you couldn't hear that. But yeah, I know that was very sly. We are so good. We've had a really rousing discussion about Bob Lazar and his credibility, and there are lots of people on both sides of the fence on this. For me, I look back to tracing the origins of the story and then seeing, looking at the people who are giving out information. And I think there is something called the long sting, which is interesting. I talked to somebody about that the other night. I wanted to bring on a caller. We've got Richard on the line. So Richard, how are you? And tell us about what you're doing. You've got a project that you were announcing in chat. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've been actually involved studying this whole phenomenon since back in the 1980s. I used to live across the street from the Fighter Weapons School of Top Gun in Miramar. And I spent a lot of time talking to the pilots because I have a really high-level understanding of air combat. And one of the things that got to me right from the beginning is they would never talk to me about how they would intercept a UFO, but yet they would talk about, Soviet aircraft and all this other stuff. And I always thought that was really bizarre. So I'm not really like a ufologist or somebody that's into it, but over the years I spent all this time studying it and doing research and coming up with my own opinion of what's going on. And in the last couple of years, I've been trying to do what I would call maybe trying to take it to the next level or be more cutting edge in terms of describing the actual terminology and concepts that are going to be in play when disclosure takes place. So for a lot of people, they find that it's almost like I'm being too critical. For example, I'll try and explain to them that when we say the term UFO that we've been using since Edward Ruppelt gave it to us back in the 1950s, no one's ever taken the time to really analyze the reality that these vehicles that are transiting to our airspace aren't actually flying. For example, you can't fly a plane in outer space. It's not possible. And when you get a higher level understanding of what aviation and flying, where you have to accelerate a wing through atmospheric medium, and these vehicles, kind of like what Bob Lazar describes, that they're basically using gravitational waves. So I've come up with a term called vectating, which is like a higher level form other than flying, which is vectored levitation. So basically what these vehicles are doing is, you know how the celestial bodies move using gravitational waves, but their inertia is locked in an orbit? Well, what these vehicles are doing is they're mimicking the way the celestial bodies work, except they can vector the inertia to be able to control their direction. And then they basically just use all the celestial bodies all through the outer space as pivot points to be able to transit back and forth between star systems. So what I'm trying to do is put forth some, more technical, what I guess I would call more cutting edge, somewhat controversial, because a lot of people feel like I'm almost upsetting the balance of the ufology community and stuff by saying that, well, they're not actually flying, so the term UFO doesn't really apply to them. So that's one of the things I've been working on. And then another thing I've been working on is that, sort of like how you've been talking about Bob Lazar and what would his motivation be for doing, all this releasing of information. What I do is I take like a much higher level look at it and say that ET is an extremely technical being, and I think they're planning on releasing that, ET exists and people on Earth know about it but haven't told us, but it's going to be a very controversial moment when all that takes place. Well, so rather than just open up and unload on the public in one day, everything that you've been seeing back to even Roswell and Kenneth Arnold's first sighting and the Air Force introducing the term UFO and all these sightings that are going on throughout history, they're basically like a choreographed little thing of subliminal dissemination where they're slowly introducing the information into the public to get us more up to speed so that when the day comes that they tell us, we're able to grasp onto the concept easier and get up and running rather than just feeling like it's an overwhelming amount of information that we don't even understand.
Right. Yeah. And that's been the sentiment for a long, long time. And so tell us where people can go to learn more about your work and sign the petition.
Well, so my petition is at extraterrestrialdisclosurepetition.com. And basically what I did with that is I started going back and studying Stephen Bassett's petition that he put on the We the People site with the government trying to ask them to disclose ET and UFO presence, and the government, after about 10,000 signatures denied it and turned it off. So I put it on change.org so that the government can't turn it off, so it can just keep collecting signatures. And what I'm doing too is that I'm realizing that if you're asking for extraterrestrial disclosure, you have to be extremely accurate about asking for it correctly. So rather than sitting there and just saying, hey, give me ET and UFO disclosure, ET is a being on another planetary system. In my personal opinion, what we're going to find out is that some of the people that are walking among us on Earth are actually what I call HET, or humanoid extraterrestrials. So I'm asking for them to disclose that humanoid extraterrestrials live among us, as well as these vehicles that are transiting the star systems aren't called UFOs. So I've come up with a couple different names for them, but one of the ones that has a three-letter acronym like UFO is a CTV, a Celestial TAC-1 vehicle. So celestial meaning that it can transit beyond the universe into the celestial realm to be able to, they say there's multiverses and parallel universes, and it can basically define its ability to go anywhere.
Right.
And the term TAC-1 is the speed of light. So these vehicles can do, how they do those 90-degree turns and they instantaneously accelerate away and then you can't see them, it almost seems like they dematerialize. So like I've come up with a term to describe that. It's called a ratio maneuver, a right-angle turn with instantaneous omnidirectional acceleration. So basically what the vehicle can do is it uses gravitational waves, or sometimes it's easier to explain it with magnetism. But basically, it can just vector its inertia and instantly accelerate past the speed of light, so it looks like it dematerialized.
Right.
So what I'm trying to do is come up with more accurate terminology and concepts to explain what's going on, as well as to try to elevate the intellectual awareness level of the public that, hey, it's possible there's actually, a subliminal dissemination of data being put out to us, and if you just pay attention to what's going on, you can educate yourself as civilians. We don't have to get spoon-fed by the government.
Absolutely, and and so if you can really quickly, because I've got another caller that I need to take, but tell us where people, give us the name of your website and where to find the petition.
Well, so the website's etufodisclosure.com, and the petition is extraterrestrialdisclosurepetition.com, all one word. So that's where they can go and sign the petition. And then I'm on Facebook. I'm on there basically every day chatting and stuff. So if they want to get on there and ask me questions and take real-time things that are going on in the public, and I comment on, give my opinion based on how you would see, HET involved in this process, or CTVs interacting. I use all the terminology and stuff like that.
Awesome. Thank you. So it's good to hear your voice, and thank you very much for calling and commenting on UFO Classified on the Facebook page. That's awesome. And Happy New Year.
You too. I really appreciate it. It's great to talk to you.
Absolutely. It's good to talk to you. And now on the line, we've got one of our friends, Mr. Greg Bishop, if he's still there.
I'm still here.
Oh, dear Lord.
Hey, Greg.
Hey, Nick. Hey,
So Greg, honestly, we wish that you were here. And one of these days, it'll be the three of us.
I was there too.
I know.
Did you drag him to the 666 of Tombstone yet?
We have not gone up to the Avenue Cemetery because it's really super snow and you couldn't find it. But I did take him to Gilbert Garden.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, that
was cool.
Amazing.
Yeah, that is really cool. And so Greg, tell us really quickly, because you've got a new book out, and I have to say that the cover is absolutely beautiful, and you sent both of us a copy, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that.
Oh yeah, the book is A is for Adamski. It's overview of the UFO contactee movement from the, late 40s up to the present. And what I saw a comment the other day on Facebook where somebody said, "Is this just a rehash of a whole bunch of other stuff?" And I was like, and they didn't expect the author to walk in and say, "Well, actually, no, it isn't. We've actually done some original research. We've gone back and gone to original sources. We went and did microfilm and library and document research to try and find out more on some of these people that were involved in the UFO contactee movement and what their lives were like, and maybe things you haven't heard before." And that was actually the goal when we did it. We've got this giant, we have access to this very large collection of old photographs of a lot of these contactees, and, informal photographs of them, things that people either haven't seen before or haven't seen in a long time. And so Go Rightly and I, he asked me to help him. We thought, let's not just make this a rehash. Let's actually go out and find more people that neither of us have heard of, which we did, and also new things about, regular, figures everybody knows about, like Frank Strange's or George Adamski, for that matter, George Hunt Williamson. We've did try to do some original research on these things, and I found new people that I'd never heard of before. And that made me happy because it's always fun to learn about new stuff. Nick, you had to look at it. Is there anything in there are there any contactees in there you'd never heard of?
Yeah, actually, there was a lot of cases or people that I'd never heard of. And, that's one of the things that kind of fascinates me, having done a book on the contactees with the stunningly original title of Contactees. And, but that, yeah. But, I think, that era, that period was like just a defining moment in ufology, and just the fact that there are cases that you go digging and you find another and you find another, and it's it's one of those things that's never really gone away. And I think it sort of harks back to an era in ufology which doesn't really exist anymore now, to a significant degree anyway.
Well, I mean, Greg, sorry, and you've been on this show, and we've talked about this. All three of us have talked about this in private, about the contactees and about perhaps some of their political agendas, or the fact that it was the one world order, or they were the tall, blonde, blue-eyed beings, and different things like that. And that's always been intriguing to me, and I'm sure you touch on that in the book.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different strains, and just like anything, in ufology, anything like this, any subject you can care to mention, people are going to bring to the table what their background. So it's like Buck Nelson, the guy from where was he from? Arkansas, I think, the one with the Venusian dog hair and all that. He, I really actually went through his book, his contactee book, and he was pleased to find that there was racial segregation on Mars. So,
wow.
Yeah. And that's, this is William Dudley Pelley was basically a right-wing fascist, and he affected quite a bit the thinking of George Hunt Williamson and a few other people.
Right. And that to me, Greg, and I want to say that is,
going on.
And I want to have you back on the show and perhaps with Nick to talk about that, because I think that is really critical. And a lot of people in ufology have no freaking clue that there were these motivations. And that's important.
There's still a bunch of right-wing nuts in ufology today.
Yeah, there are. It's just that it's been there from the beginning. And somebody, I think I was on the Exploring the Bizarre with Tim and Tim last night, and we were talking about that, and I was saying, I kind of thought about it for a second. I said, God, if there was an internet back then, who knows what kind of world we'd be living in now? Because back then, people really had to dig for information. Now all you have to do is, sit down in front of your computer and find 100 things that support whatever crazy idea you can come up with, no matter what it might be, and 1,000 people that agree with you. Where back then you'd have to go to the UFO convention and kind of talk about it quietly, and and the FBI would be interested in you, So.
Well, and I have to say that I was listening to a radio show by somebody. I will not mention the name, but they had a person on that was promoting the Sandy Hook hoax. And to me, that just was so uncalled for and so unprofessional. And that has nothing to do with the study of the phenomena. And I think it's very detrimental, and it leads to this conspiracy theory nonsense. And then you look back historically through the decades since the 40s and 50s. I mean, there were always people with these fringe ideas that were trying to manipulate the subject and interject their extremist ideas, which we have to learn how to separate that.
Yeah, well, the government has, everybody's trying to stick their spin on this, because even if there was peer review, I don't think it would make any difference, because everybody's going to put their spin on this, and there's not a person you can go to, which, or some body that says this is what's going on, because it's UFO research is not based on reproducible evidence. It's just evidence that we have from people that have seen things and radar traces and all that. And that means there's really something going on, but there's no way to pin it down in the way that we have decided that that evidence can be presented as something that we can count on. So consequently, it just gets spun out whenever, in any way that people want to spin it out. And I disagree with people. Nick does. You do. And
I don't.
The basic question, I think,
whatever.
The basic question here, to me in ufology, is what causes UFO reports. Not where do they come from. Not what are the ships like. Not what is the government going to tell us. The basic question is what causes the reports. And that opens up a whole lot of questions for me, and interesting research. What psychology? What role does your psychology play? What role does the culture play? What do we know about the nature of reality and how that's changing now? That all feeds into that question: what causes the report? Not what the UFO is, but what causes the report. I think that's a really important question.
Oh, and I absolutely agree. And I think that and again, like I always try to tell my audience, it is really, really, really critical that if you're trying to find factual information out about serious study, you don't turn to anybody in mainstream ufology. In fact, you don't turn to really anybody in the United States, because that is not where an objective, unbiased opinion is. And so that's my own personal opinion. I think it's been manipulated.
Oh,
and
there's
all I have
plenty
to,
of. I
Pardon?
think there's plenty of people in the United States that have that attitude. It's just that they're not loud, and they're not trying to get themselves on shows and TV shows and radio shows and I'm right and all that. The ego enters in there, and the message gets lost in the ego. So, and there are people like that in the United States. It's just that, like I said, you don't hear from them too much because they remain quiet because they've got work to do.
Right. I mean, but if you're looking for, if you're somebody who's a witness and you're looking for a community and you're looking to try to find answers, you don't do it anywhere on YouTube, or you don't do it anywhere by going to maybe some of the lectures. And unfortunately it's so polluted. But that's why I gravitate towards you and Nick and Barry Greenwood and people, and Erling Strand over in Norway. I mean, there's some great people who are doing work that I think is important. So, and I love that. And I can't wait to hang out with you, Greg and Nick. We're going to cause some trouble, go paragliding or not. We'll watch you go paragliding.
Yeah, there's
that'll
a great
be good.
spot, a point of the mountain right near you.
Yeah, I've heard about that. I'll take video.
Yeah, that is a famous paraglider. The guy that took over the school that I learned at was the main instructor at Point of the Mountain. So I know I've never flown there, but I would really like to.
Well, that'll be fun. We'll have to plan it. And Greg, thanks for calling in. We'll call you a little bit later. But Nick, I wanted to thank you for being here and talking about your new book.
Well,
and
thanks.
so people can go to Barnes & Noble and find that, and Amazon. And so what are you working on next? What's your new project?
Well, I've got one coming out in a few months, which deals with something that's kind of timely in terms of the origins, so to speak. But, well, basically what it is, I've got a book coming out round about the end of April, thereabouts, about how over the years the Soviet Union essentially sort of created a lot of UFO disinformation against the West. For example, if you look at a lot of the early contactees, a number of them were promoting communism, and that's why the FBI opened files on people like George Adamski. It wasn't because they were concerned directly about his UFO claims. It was the fact that he was talking about the aliens having sort of a communist-type government. And bear in mind that his first two books collectively sold more than 200,000 copies. He went from being sort of a lowly character to someone who became a person of interest, as they're known today. And I've got a lot of really intriguing data as to how the Soviets at the height of the Cold War, throughout the Cold War, created a number of deceptions, not always for UFO reasons, but often for political reasons and belief systems, and used the UFO subject as a motif. So it's sort of like a Russian meddling, a term we hear a lot today, but this one will be Russian meddling in relation to UFOs.
I'm excited to see that, because I think that there is a lot of that. And what I would say is, if people are interacting with you on social media, make sure you do a background research on them. If they're using fake identities, that should be pretty easy to track, and you don't know what their motivations are. And so just be careful, because your personal sightings are that's important data to somebody. So, Nick Redfern, thank you for being here.
One last thing I would just say is that in all the research I've done on Area 51, I've sort of come to one of two conclusions. Either there really are crashed or recovered UFOs at Area 51, and we're having trouble or not much luck at all in understanding the technology, or for bizarre and psychological warfare reasons, that there are people who want us to believe that technology is out at Area 51, that they want us to believe that alien technology exists at Area 51, or it really does. It's one of the two. And for me, rather ironically, the idea of somebody creating a massive non-existent history to convince us there are aliens at Area 51 in many respects is more fascinating than the idea that aliens really are at Area 51. You know, the idea that there is this deception program going on to convince us that this is going on at Area 51 and that's going on for reasons we don't understand, but which is somehow deeply embedded into ufology. Now, the big question is, why would someone, or why would a group of people within the intelligence community want us to believe there are aliens at Area 51? That gets to the heart of much of the book as to you know, what's real and what isn't, and what's somewhere in between.
Well, I think it's a beautiful book, and I'm excited to sit down and read it when I'm not driving and scaring you to death. But
I wasn't frightened. It was cool fun seeing, you know, just missing cars by mere inches. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the breaker 19.
Yeah.
Here's a
like, look out! Watch
there's
for
a
that
bumper.
one. Watch for
It's 2
this
inches
one.
away. Well, you know, I mean, it's
Brake,
never,
Erica, brake!
It's never a dull moment.
That's what makes it good. So,
yeah, I know. Living on the edge. That's kind of my thoughts. So, anyway, I will be here next week with Stephen Miles Lewis, who has a great archive. Stick around for Willie Miranda on the Paradigm Matrix. Again, thank you to all of my friends who get in there, ask questions. Have a wonderful night and a happy New Year.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at UFOclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network.